Imagine losing everything that defined you. Not some of it, everything. The title, the identity, the structure that told you who you were every morning when you opened your eyes. Gone. No roadmap, no one to report to, no system telling you what comes next. Most men in that moment collapse. Not dramatically, quietly. They spend months, sometimes years, trying to rebuild the exact thing that just fell apart, trying to find another master, another system, another external structure that will tell them who they are again. But there is a different kind of man, a man who, when everything is stripped away, does not scramble to replace it, a man who walks into the emptiness and builds something from the inside out. In feudal Japan, they had a name for this man. They called him the Ronin, and what he discovered in the wilderness between who he was and who he would become. That is what this video is about. Stay with me, because I promise you, by the end of this, you are never going to look at your own starting over moments the same way again. Chapter 1. The Warrior Who Lost Everything. Let me tell you about a man named Sasaki Kojiro. You may know his name. He was the most celebrated swordsman in Japan before Miyamoto Musashi. Perfect technique, impeccable training, a blade so long they called it the drying pole. He had trained under the greatest masters. He had won every formal duel. He had a master. He had a school. He had structure. And in 1612, on a small island called Ganryujima, Musashi, who had no master, no school, no formal system, killed him in seconds. With a wooden sword, he carved on the boat ride over. Now here is the question nobody asks about that story. How? How does the man with no master defeat the man with the perfect master? The answer to that question is the entire philosophy of the Ronin. And it is the answer that modern men who have lost their job, their relationship, their identity, their direction, need more than any motivational speech ever written. But before we get there, I need to show you something about the Ronin that most people completely misunderstand. Chapter 2. What the Ronin actually was. Most people think of the Ronin as a failure, a samurai who lost his master, a warrior without a home, a man defined by what he no longer had. That is not what the Ronin was. Here is what actually happened when a samurai became a Ronin. Every external structure was removed. The hierarchy, the obligation, the identity handed down from above, the rules about who he was supposed to be, how he was supposed to think, what path he was supposed to walk. All of it gone. And in that emptiness, that terrifying, uncomfortable, radically free emptiness, the Ronin faced the question that most men spend their entire lives successfully avoiding. Who am I when no one is telling me? This is not a soft question. This is the hardest question a man can face. Because most men's identities are not built. They are borrowed from their job title, their relationship status, their social circle, the approval of the people around them, the structure that tells them where to be and when and why. Take all of that away, and most men do not know who is left. The Ronin knew. Not immediately, not comfortably, but through the specific process of walking the road between masters, with no one to tell him, no system to follow, no approval to seek. The Ronin built something that the comfortable samurai, secure in his lord's house, never could. He built himself. Chapter 3. The moment your life became a Ronin story. Here is where this gets personal. Drop everything for a second and think. Have you ever had a Ronin moment? The relationship that ended and left you not knowing who you were without it. The career that collapsed and took your entire sense of purpose with it. The version of yourself you built your life around. The provider, the achiever, the man with the plan that suddenly stopped being available to inhabit. The moment where you looked around and the structure was gone. I am not asking if you survived it. You did. You are here. I am asking something different. Did you use it? Because here is what the Ronin philosophy says about those moments that will completely reframe how you think about them. The moment your master is gone, whether that master was a job, a relationship, an identity, or a belief system, is not the worst thing that can happen to you. It is an invitation, not a comfortable one, not one you would choose if you were given the option, but an invitation nonetheless, to build the version of yourself that does not depend on an external master to exist. And I need you to stay with me here, because what comes next is the part that most videos on this topic completely miss. Right here. Drop the word Ronin in the comments if you have had this moment. The moment when the structure fell and you were left with the question of who you were without it. One word. Let me know you are with me. Chapter 4. The 3 stages every Ronin goes through. Here is what nobody tells you about starting over. It is not one experience, it is 3, and each one requires something completely different from you. Stage 1. The wilderness. The first stage is the one that breaks most men. Not because it is the hardest, because they do not understand what it is for. The wilderness is the period immediately after the structure falls. The weeks or months where nothing has replaced what was lost, where the identity vacuum is loudest, where the urge to immediately fill the emptiness with the nearest available substitute is almost overwhelming. A new job that looks like the old job, a new relationship that plays the same role as the old one, a new master, any master, to replace the one who is gone. Musashi spent years in the wilderness between masters, walking Japan alone. No patron, no school, no title, no one to tell him who he was. And he did not rush to fill the emptiness. This is the most important and the most counterintuitive lesson of stage 1. The wilderness is not the problem to be solved. It is the solution. Because the man who fills the emptiness immediately never discovers what lives in it. He never meets the version of himself that only exists in the absence of external definition. He never finds the specific direction that can only be heard in the silence after the noise stops. The wilderness is where the real man lives, waiting, not to be found by someone else, to be found by you. Stage 2. The forging. The second stage is where most men who survive the wilderness make their second critical mistake. They start rebuilding, which is correct, but they rebuild the same thing, which is not. Here is the brutal truth about stage 2. Starting over is not a chance to return to who you were. It is a chance to become who you could not have been before the fall. The fire that destroyed the old structure also burned away everything that was not truly yours. The identity elements that were borrowed, the direction that was absorbed from the environment rather than chosen, the version of yourself that existed because it was available, not because it was real. What is left in the ashes, the things that survived the burning, those are yours, genuinely yours. The values that did not require the structure to exist, the capabilities that remained when the title was gone, the qualities that were never dependent on the master's approval to be real. The Ronin who came out of stage 2 did not find a new master and return to the system. He built something from the material that the fire could not consume. Musashi came out of his wilderness years as something the formal samurai system had no category for. A warrior artist, a philosopher, a man who had forged an entirely original school of strategy, Niten Ichi-ryu, from materials that belonged to no one but him. He could not have built that inside the structure. The structure would not have allowed it. The fall was the prerequisite. Stage 3. The return. The third stage is the least understood and the most powerful. The return is not the moment you arrive back at the same level you were before. The return is the moment you arrive somewhere that the old level could not have reached. Musashi returned from his wilderness years as a man that the most powerful lords in Japan wanted at their table. Not because he had found a master, because he had become one. The Ronin who walks all three stages does not come back to where he left. He comes back to somewhere the fall made possible. And this is the reframe that changes everything. The fall was not the interruption of your story. It was the turning point. Chapter 5. Why having no master is terrifying, and why that is exactly the point. Let me tell you something uncomfortable. The reason most men rush to find a new master immediately after losing one is not practical. It is not because they need income, not because they need direction, not because the practical demands of life require it. It is because having no master means confronting something that the master's presence was successfully preventing them from confronting themselves. The job that keeps you busy enough to avoid the question of whether you actually like your life. The relationship that fills the silence where your own voice should be. The structure that tells you who to be so you never have to answer the question for yourself. These things are not just systems, they are shields, and the man whose shields have been removed, who is standing in the open air of his own life with nothing between him and the question of who he is, that man is going to feel something. Fear. Disorientation. The specific vertigo of a man who has been relying on external structures for his sense of self for so long that standing without them feels like standing on the edge of a cliff. Here is what the Ronin philosophy says about that feeling. That feeling is not a warning to run back to the nearest structure. That feeling is the specific sensation of becoming, because the man who is not afraid has nothing at stake. The man who feels the vertigo is the man who is actually standing at the edge of something real, something that required the fall to reveal. The terror is the signal that you are in exactly the right place. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, alone, in his journal, not for anyone else to read. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He was writing that in the middle of running the most powerful empire on earth. He was writing it because every day he faced the specific terror of standing with no external validation for his decisions. As the man at the top, there was no one above him to tell him he was right. He chose the Ronin position, not because his structure fell, because he understood that the man who depends on external confirmation for his inner authority has no inner authority. He was manufacturing his own Ronin moment every day, in the journal, in the practice, in the deliberate confrontation with the question of who he was without the empire's permission. That practice is available to you right now. Chapter 6. The 5 Laws of the Ronin's Rebuild. Now we build the practical framework, not inspiration, a system. 5 laws drawn from the Ronin philosophy, the Bushido Code, and the lived example of the men who turned their starting over moments into the greatest chapters of their lives. Ronin Law 1. Do not build for the audience you lost. The most common mistake in every starting over story is rebuilding to impress the people who witnessed the fall. The man who lost his corporate identity trying to rebuild a bigger corporate identity to prove something to the people who watched him lose it. The man who lost a relationship immediately performing the improved version of himself for the audience of the relationship that ended. The man building his comeback for the wrong people. The Ronin did not build his new life to impress the Lord who was gone. He built it because it was his to build, for its own sake, according to his own standard. Who are you building for right now? If the answer is anyone other than yourself, stop. Reset. Start from the inside. Ronin Law 2. Inventory what the fire could not burn. Before you build, stop and take honest stock. Not of what you lost, of what remained, the capabilities that exist, regardless of the title. The values that were true before the structure and are true after. The relationships that are real because they survived the fall. The qualities in yourself that were never dependent on the master's approval to exist. These are your actual materials, the things you are actually building from. Musashi lost his family before he was old enough to choose it. He lost the formal school system before he was old enough to qualify for it. He lost the conventional samurai path before he had fully walked it. What remained? His mind, his body, his relentless commitment to mastery of his craft, his willingness to test everything he knew against anyone willing to face him. That was enough, more than enough, because it was genuinely his. Take 30 minutes today. Write down everything that remained after your fall, not what you had before, what you still have. That list is the blueprint. Ronin Law 3. Move before you are ready. The wilderness has an enemy, and that enemy is not the emptiness. It is the waiting. The man who says, I will start when I know what I am doing. I will begin when I have more clarity. I will move when the direction is obvious. That man does not move, because clarity does not arrive before movement. It arrives through movement. The Ronin did not know what his path was when he left his lord's house. He found out by walking, by training, by testing himself against the road, by discovering, in the specific friction of motion, what he was made of and where he was going. You do not need to know where you are going before you start moving. You need to start moving before you can discover where you are going. This week, take one concrete action in the direction of what you know, however vaguely, that your rebuilt life requires, not the perfect action, a real one. Ronin Law 4. Let the fall change you, not just your circumstances. This is the law that most people violate. Starting over is not a reset. It is not a second chance to arrive at the same destination from a different route. It is a chance for the actual transformation that the comfortable life was preventing. The man who goes through a fall and comes out the other side exactly who he was, just in different circumstances, has wasted the fall. The Ronin who used his time in the wilderness to become something the structure could not have produced, that man honored the fall by letting it actually change him. Ask yourself honestly, what does this fall want to teach me that I could not have learned any other way? Not what lesson makes the fall feel better. What does the specific nature of this specific fall reveal about the specific thing in you that needed to develop? That answer, honestly arrived at, honestly applied, is the gold inside the break. The kintsugi we explored in episode 9. Ronin Law 5. Build a life that needs no master. The final law, and the most important. The goal of the Ronin's journey is not to find a better master. It is to become the man who no longer needs one. Not independence in the antisocial sense. Not the performance of not needing anyone. The specific inner authority that comes from a man who has tested himself in the wilderness, who has sat with the question of who he is without external definition, and has built from the inside out a foundation that does not require external approval to stand. Musashi became this. He was not the samurai without a master out of failure. He was the samurai without a master out of completion. He had built enough of himself that no external structure could add what he needed. He had become the source. That is the Ronin's destination. Not a new master. Yourself. Built fully enough that you are the authority you were looking for. Chapter 7. The Modern Ronin. What this looks like in your life. Let me bring this out of feudal Japan and into the specific texture of your actual life, because the Ronin story is not a historical curiosity. It is happening right now, all around you. In the men who are navigating the specific version of masterlessness that the modern world produces, the man in his 30s who built his entire identity around being a husband and father and is now divorced, he is in the wilderness. The question is whether he uses it. The man who spent 15 years in a career that collapsed when the company restructured, he is in the wilderness. The question is whether he uses it. The man who built his sense of worth entirely around a physical capability, an athletic identity, and suffered an injury that removed it, he is in the wilderness. The man who believed a particular version of the world, a particular ideology, a particular framework for understanding himself and reality, and watched that framework fall apart. He is in the wilderness. Each of these men is standing in the same emptiness that Musashi stood in, with the same question echoing in the same silence. Who am I when no one is telling me? And each of them has the same two options. Rush to fill the emptiness, find the nearest available master, rebuild the same identity in a new location, return to comfort before the wilderness has done its work, or stay. Stay in the wilderness long enough to meet yourself in it, long enough to hear the voice that the noise was drowning out, long enough to discover that the emptiness is not a problem. It is the most important space you have ever inhabited, and what you build inside it, unhurried, honestly, from the materials the fall could not consume, is the version of yourself that nothing can take away. Because it was never borrowed. It was always yours. One more thing before we close. Drop the number of the Ronin law that you need most right now. Just the number. 1 through 5. Let me see which ones are landing where they need to. Chapter 8. What the Ronin becomes. Let me tell you how Musashi's story ends. Not the duel at Ganryujima, not the Book of Five Rings. The end. In 1643, at 58 years old, Miyamoto Musashi climbed into a cave called Reigando on the island of Kyushu. He had been invited to stay in palaces. He had been offered positions of wealth and honor by lords who wanted his name attached to their legacy. He chose the cave, not because he was broken, not because he had run out of options, because after 60 years of the Ronin path, after 60 years of building himself from the inside out with no master to validate the building, he had arrived at the only place the journey could end. Complete, not perfect, not without cost, not without the specific scars that a life fully lived inevitably produces. Complete. He had become a man who needed nothing external to know what he was worth, who required no approval to act according to his values, who asked for no permission from the world to occupy the space his life required. He wrote the Dokodo, the way of walking alone, in that cave. 21 precepts, not for posterity, for himself, as the final honest accounting of everything he had learned in a lifetime of being his own master. The first precept reads, "Accept everything just the way it is." Not resignation, the specific piece of a man who has stopped fighting reality and started building within it. The last precept reads, "Never stray from the way." Not a rule, a description of a man who had walked so far into his own way that straying from it was no longer a temptation. It was no longer even a concept. He was the way. That is what the Ronin becomes. Not when the wilderness ends, not when the new master is found, not when the starting over is complete, and the comfortable life is restored. When he stops waiting for permission to become himself. That moment is available to you, not in the future, not after the circumstances improve, not when the direction is finally clear and the fear is finally gone. Right now, in the specific wilderness you are standing in. The cave is wherever you are. Build something in it. Closing. You came into this video in the middle of something. Maybe a fall you are still processing. Maybe a starting over chapter you are mid-stride in. Maybe a masterless period that feels more like failure than invitation. I want to leave you with one thing. The man you admire most, the man whose life you would most want to have lived, almost certainly had a Ronin moment. A fall, a masterless period, a time in the wilderness when nothing was certain and the only available direction was forward. He did not become who he became despite that period. He became who he became because of it. Your wilderness is not the interruption of your story. It is the most important chapter. Stop waiting for the master who is not coming. Stop rebuilding the structure that was supposed to fall. Go into the emptiness. Meet yourself in it. Build from the inside. The man with no master becomes the man who needs none. That man is already in you. The wilderness is how you find him.